when the children have these individual therapies, what's so important is that these therapists help develop a home program so that they could feed into what we are calling the semi-structured program, so parents can practice these things with their children in an ongoing way. And that's where we can get the ideas to shape that semi-structured program.
Right. That's a very, very important point, that the semi-structured component should be a team effort made up of the parents, the different therapists, speech pathologists, occupational and physical therapists, educators or special educators, developmental pediatrician, if the developmental pediatrician is involved in the case. But this should be a team approach where the goals are set each week and they can be modified each week in keeping with where the child is.
With the parent participating in the therapy, so we really get a good back and forth flow going with a clear idea of what our goals are for the next week or two.
Yeah, and another component of the intervention program is peer play. Once children are engaged with caregivers and involved in a continuous flow of gesturing and beginning to use a little bit of symbols and language, that's a perfect time to begin bringing in peer play so they practice these emerging skills with peers. And it should be a verbal, interactive peer, and the parent or therapist may need to mediate. But 3, 4, even 5 times a week, we like to average around 4 times a week or more for peer play so the children get used to interacting with someone else as part of this comprehensive program. And then I was mentioning before, we always want to include the biomedical component. One, in the assessment to rule out physical problems, but also in the intervention side to see if there are biomedical interventions that may be helpful. Some children do very well on certain medications, and this needs to be assessed for every child, and some children may need to actually, paradoxically, develop certain skills, develop more language and more interactive skills, and then they graduate where medication may be helpful. But sometimes some medications can be helpful for a circumscribed problem, but not for a more global problem. And as children make progress, sometimes medication may have a limited role. We find that this is an important part of the overall program. Also, nutritional assessment and evaluation. Some children require elimination diets to help them regulate themselves better, and also can facilitate, if they're better regulated, better language and better interaction in some of the children. So nutritional evaluations are very, very important on an individual basis for the children. And then we have to keep an open attitude about the intervention process and consider what's going to be a special help to a child. Will a special gym class, will music be helpful? Rhythmic activities are often very, very helpful. Other kinds of activity the child finds interesting. But whatever we're going to do and consider, and as new things emerge on the horizon, we always want to relate it back to the core. How is this going to help the child go up the developmental ladder in terms of their developmental capacities? How will it help them resolve or improve some of their processing abilities, including the capacity for just being better regulated? So we keep an open mind, but we relate everything back to a core, and we don't do anything in a fragmented or isolated way.
Well, what I think we're doing all the time is evaluating the overall rate of progress. And that for some children, they'll respond quickly, and they may, show very rapid gains, and other children work more slowly. But I think it's important to persist, even with children who work more slowly, with this overall plan.
Well, especially for children who move more slowly, we have to persist, because there we could easily lessen our efforts. We run into challenges.
Or move to much more structured approaches, which will really rob them of a chance to develop the range that they will most benefit from.
Yeah, and it should be highlighted that if you move to too structured an approach because the child's progress is slow, it's a little bit like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's a little bit, what you do is you add structure onto the semi-structured component. So a child who can't learn to imitate because they can't motor plan, we can do it in a very drill-oriented way. But that's only one component to help the child learn to imitate a motor plan while we're still doing the dynamic interactive work. So we don't lose the things the child needs to grow and develop, but we add on more structure for the children who need it. So some children in the semi-structured initially start out very, very structured in that third of their program, and then graduate to more dynamic problem solving. So we want to keep an open mind, integrate and synthesize the different emerging new insights in intervention. And in this kind of an intervention model, we don't have to close the door to any possibility. As new insights comes in, as new ways of interacting with children are learned, as new educational approaches and language approaches and occupational physical therapy approaches are learned, we could see how they relate to the core and bring in the elements in keeping with the child's profile. Now, we've talked about this in a very generic sense, but in the action of the real world, all these principles get applied very specifically based on the child's profile. Every child is different based on our assessment approach. And each intervention plan, while having some of these common elements, although not all for each child, will be applied very differently depending on the child. And here's where we want to look at some cases and some actual children to see how we apply these principles, particularly the floor time interactive principles and some of the semi-structured problem-solving principles, in very, very unique ways.